Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Hey Bub Outdoors. It's good to be with you. We have a special guest today. It's a longtime friend. In fact, it's family around here at Hey Bub. Matt and I are pleased to welcome our friend, but also brother-in-law, Kip from Blacktail Archery, one of the premier traditional archery bow companies. He's here tonight, and the question we're asking him tonight is, should we ditch our compound bows in a world that seems to be trending more towards archery equipment, traditional archery equipment? Should we ditch our compound bows? And so we have Kip Shipley here from Blacktail Archery to help us answer that question. Kip, it's good to have you on tonight. Welcome.
It's good to be here tonight, guys. Like you said, it's a long time coming.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so Kip, maybe we can start by you just giving us kind of a little intro about yourself. Tell folks where you live, where you're from, and then additionally what your role is at Blacktail, how you kind of came to be with Blacktail bows.
Yeah, no problem at all. I'm Kip Shipley. I'm from Bloomington, Indiana, born and raised, lived here my whole life. I've got a wife and 3 kids. They're hanging out inside right now. I'm out in the shop to try and keep it a little bit quieter out here, amazingly enough. In terms of how I got started with Blacktail bows, it was about 10 years ago, actually. I got a call from a guy who got my name from my friend's dad, of all people, said he was going to be setting up a bow shop in Bloomington and was looking for some guys to come do some work. I had some woodworking experience and a little bit of bow making experience with self bows, and so I went out there and joined the team. Started a low guy on the totem pole and worked my way up to shop foreman. And then this last year, in January, my former coworker and I took over as business partners, took over the company, and we've been running it since January.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's super cool to kind of see how far along you've come in the past 10 years. I actually can't believe it's been 10 years that you've been with them, but that's so cool to kind of see the journey and see how God has had his hand in that process as well. So you kind of mentioned you had woodworking experience. You and your dad had been doing some cabinet work together for quite some time, and then you started making your own self bows. Is that kind of like I guess the beginning of, kind of how they got your contact information and were like, oh, this guy might be good at this thing?
Yeah. They're just kind of looking for a guy who has some woodworking experience. Like you said, I grew up around a wood shop. My dad was a cabinet maker, handyman, my whole life. So as long as I could remember, I've been around saws and sanders and all that. And then in high school, I got into wanting to make a bow for myself because I decided I wanted to get into hunting, but I wanted to take an animal with something I made myself. So I went out in the woods and cut down a tree and seasoned it and made a self bow. And that was a hobby for quite a few years. And that eventually turned into this career.
Awesome. That's really cool. So maybe can you tell us a little bit about Blacktail and kind of just maybe some of the like history of the company, maybe, and then also what are kind of the things that Blacktail is known for and differentiates Blacktail from other traditional bow companies out there?
Yeah, no problem at all. So Blacktail Bow Company started officially as a company back in 1991. We were actually originally based way out on the West Coast in a town known as Reedsport, Oregon. The founder of the company's name was Norm Johnson. He's a bit of a legend out on the West Coast in the Pacific Northwest. A lot of guys know him as an excellent bow maker, an excellent hunter. He has like 20 some different elk that he's taken in his lifetime, tons of muleys, black-tail deer. Yeah, so we started out there, and then my former boss bought into the company and opened up a shop here in Bloomington, and that's how I got started working there. In terms of what we're known for, the biggest thing we're known for is just the aesthetic of our bow. We're largely regarded as one of the best bow companies in terms of fit and finish of the final product. We take a lot of pride in making sure we do our best work. we want to make sure all the seams where the limbs made up to the riser are nice and smooth transition. We want to maintain good smooth lines. It's kind of similar to like a classic sports car. Some guys have compared our risers to that, just the nice smooth curves and good hard lines, and it makes for a nice looking bow.
One of the things that you kind of mentioned, you've been around woodworking for a long time. One of my first memories of Kip was, so when him and my sister Lindsay started dating back in high school, Kip drove a Dodge Dakota and had custom made an armrest for the middle console out of wood. And it was like the fanciest looking wood armrest. And I was like, wow, this guy really likes to work with wood. And so it just makes sense that this is kind of the path you've taken, but also kind of to just tie into that attention to detail that you guys are known for on the bow making side. That's just kind of been your mantra since I've known you, is like the attention to detail in everything you do. Even baking. Kip is an excellent baker, guys. He makes a cake that is my very favorite cake in all the world.
Killer cheesecake.
Killer cheesecake. My favorite is the chocolate raspberry ganache cake. That one's spectacular. So yeah, that's cool. Very cool to kind of very cool to kind of learn a little bit of the history, and Bloomington, Indiana, of all places, the company is kind of settled, which is pretty cool.
Where there are no blacktail deer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what would you say when it comes to the concept of, all right, well, I've kind of, maybe some of our listeners have gotten into archery at a young age, maybe even, but have always been shooting a compound bow. What are kind of the main differences from your perspective, Kip, on the difference between shooting a traditional bow and shooting a compound bow? Like, what are some of the big call outs in terms of what makes them unique?
Yeah, probably the biggest thing is just accuracy. It is much more difficult to drive tacks with a traditional bow than with a compound or a crossbow. And honestly, a lot of the guys that we've seen moving into traditional have come to it for the challenge. We've had a number of different customers tell us that they got bored shooting crossbows and then pick it up and in 5 or 10 shots be driving tacks like they were the year before. And so they just kind of got bored with it, and they were looking for the next challenge. Traditional archery will definitely give that to you. It'll drive you nuts. My coworker and I joke sometimes that if you're wanting to hit what you're aiming at all the time, this probably isn't the avenue you want to go. There's going to be a lot of frustration in moments. But when that arrow goes right where you're looking, there's just something about the feel of that.
Yeah, that's really cool, Kip. So like when you're talking about accuracy, that's one thing, but as far as like overall performance of a traditional bow, like do you have any limitations there? I mean, what kind of size limit are we talking about for what you can, harvest with it?
Yeah. I mean, you can, if it walks or swims, it's been taken with a traditional bow. If anyone hunts it, I know there are pictures back in the early 40s and 50s, I want to say, of guys doing Africa hunts. I've seen pictures with just a simple Howard Hill longbow of guys taking lions, Cape buffalo. I've even seen an elephant or two taken with traditional equipment. Certainly anything on North America can be harvested with a traditional bow.
That's awesome. So when you talk about kind of the limitations, like Adam mentioned, what are in terms of like feet per second and all of that? Is there kind of a baseline? So let's say I have I don't know how this equates to traditional. You'll have to excuse me because I'm not great and super informed. But say I have a 30-inch draw for a compound bow and I pull 70. So that's my current compound bow setup. What might I expect out of the same arrow setup if I'm shooting like, I don't know, 280, feet per second or something like that. I don't know. What would be like an equivalent to traditional maybe?
Yeah, so for traditional, guys that are chasing speed with traditional bows are hoping to shoot over 200 feet per second. Obviously that's dependent on arrow weight, and typically it's measured grains per pound of draw. I like to shoot a 10 to 15 grain per pound of draw weight arrow. I like a good heavy arrow. Back when I first started my first bow, I was achieving some speeds over 200 feet per second with about an 8 grain per pound arrow or 9 grain per pound. So they can come out pretty fast. I was shooting a pretty heavy bow. It was 78 pounds at 32-inch draw. So it packs a pretty good amount of energy in that longer draw length with that higher weight. A lot of guys who are traditional don't even look at their speed. The one thing that makes a big difference, traditional equipment is extremely quiet. And so you don't have to worry about the sound of a cam slamming home. My current bow I shoot is a one-piece longbow that we make, and that is whisper quiet. The sound of the arrow striking the target is louder than the sound of the bow when you shoot the arrow.
Wow.
So give a little reference here. I mean, so what is your draw length? I mean, you're 6'5", right? Are you 6'5", 6'4",
Yeah.
6'5"? So what's your draw length?
6'5". Typically I'm drawing around 32 inches. If I overdraw a little bit, I do get over 32 into 33, 34. But typically I shoot for 32 inches. It's kind of hard to find longer arrows if I start drawing it back further than that. I've come close to cutting my fingertip a couple times with a broadhead on when I'm not paying attention. So I try and keep it about 32.
Do you keep or do you shoot a similar arrow setup that you would for compound, like same arrow shafts, or you don't have to get anything specific for traditional?
Yeah, for the most part, I shoot carbon shafts. A lot of guys that shoot traditional like wood shafts. I'll probably get into that again at some point, but just for ease of purchasing, the carbon shafts are really easy to pick up. I think you and I actually are shooting the same broadhead right now. I've got the A. Boyer 250 grain single bevels.
Nice.
I love the way they fly. They hit hard. They're a solid head.
Yeah, you were the one that put me on them, and I've been super pleased so far.
Mm-hmm.
So any other, in terms of like, so let's say that someone decides they want to start and try out traditional archery, and they come to you guys and they say, hey, this is kind of my price range. This is what I'm looking at in terms of draw length, draw weight, all of that. You guys kind of outfit them based on those specifications. Is there anything else that they need to provide in order to make that happen? Like what other kinds of questions would someone expect to get asked?
Yeah. So typically one of the biggest questions we ask guys, just because of the aesthetic of our bows, is the wood choice. Guys spend a lot of time looking at pictures of different species of woods. We use a lot of different exotics, and that's usually one of the hardest things for guys to decide is which one of the woods we offer that they want to put in their bow. We use some stabilized burls, stabilized spalted woods from Africa, South Pacific, South America, Central America. Some domestic stuff too, but a lot of times it's the wood species, the different accents that we offer. We actually do have some high-end art piece bows that are hand carved and inlaid with either silver or mother of pearl or some different carvings inlaid to it. Those ones are always a lot of questions and time go into the design of those bows, and they turn out something special when they're done, for sure.
Yeah, the artistic side of things, Kip, is just, to me, when I think about you and how God's made you and designed you, I mean, you've always just had this knack for beauty and being able to bring beauty into what you do. And so I think that's one of the coolest things for me, is just to be able to see you join this passion of woodworking. And woodworking always has this artistic side, for some more than others, but you really, to see you be able to craft these bows, which really are just, they're beautiful. I mean, it's some of those, especially what you're talking about, being inlaid with silver. I mean, that's more than this bub can handle. I mean, I have deer blood all over that thing. But
yeah,
it's just unbelievable, to see you doing what God made you to do. And it brings me a lot of joy seeing that. So, but one of the things I was thinking about too, when it came to just that arrow question Matt asked, has the FOC, on the carbon end of things, we've found speed isn't as important. I mean, on the compound end of things, speed isn't as important now than it was. We're talking about, arrows hitting hard and being effective once they reach there. I mean, you can have the most accurate bow, but if the broadhead doesn't function properly, or if the arrow doesn't carry enough kinetic energy, then it's just not going to perform when it gets there. Have you seen a return of like this FOC concept with traditional archery as well? Is that a conversation that traditional archers are having?
There's definitely some of that. There are a lot of guys that have just been shooting that for years before it was a popular thing. A lot of the real old timers have been shooting very heavy arrows for a very long time. Not concerned about speed, but just concerned about, like you said, the kinetic energy when it gets there. Really, when it all comes down to it, it's all about the physics. And, a fast, light arrow might be moving quick, but if you got a longer shot, it's going to lose a lot of that energy. Those heavy arrows really maintain a lot more force, and they strike and hit hard. So yeah, you have some of that. Some guys that are a little bit more cynical in the traditional world, or kind of poke fun a little bit about all the talk about FOC just because it has been a thing for a while. There's some old codgers out there you got to watch out for. But for the most part, it's a pretty similar kind of thing. A lot of guys like the fixed blades. There's not a lot of mechanical guys in traditional archery. A lot of single bevels, a lot of fixed blade heads.
Yeah.
I think that you mentioned that they're just extremely quiet, and I think that that's interesting, because a lot of the argument around having a high FOC arrow out of a compound is kind of that it's okay. Well, it's more reaction time for the deer. So once he hears your bow, he hears the cams, as you said, Kip. He or she is going to react and likely duck the arrow at some point. So, people try and anticipate that. But if you're shooting a quiet bow, it helps take that noise thing out of the equation, where you don't have to worry as much about how the deer is going to react. So I see that as a major benefit when we're having the conversation of like, all right, well, which direction should I go? Should I try out traditional? That could be a crucial piece for someone that wants a heavier arrow setup and wants to, like you said, have a setup that stores a lot of that kinetic energy, but also is afraid to kind of take the risk of like, well, the animal's going to react. Because no matter how quiet you set up your bow, a compound is going to make noise. And it's probably much more substantial than traditional. So that's pretty interesting stuff there. Are there any other like accessories that you definitely need for a traditional, like when it comes to getting a whole kit together? So you need your bow, you need arrows. What do you guys use? Like obviously we have a release, right? Typically for compound bows. What do most guys use for drawing their bow and all of that? Anything else?
Yeah, most guys that are shooting traditional are either going to shoot a tab that's just kind of a piece of leather or other material that goes over your hands just to protect your fingertips, or a glove. I shoot a leather glove myself. I like the feeling of the glove. I've shot a tab some. I don't really care for it. There are certain types of traditional bows that actually require a thumb ring to shoot. It's a completely different draw style. It's based more on the steppes of Asia, Mongolian style. It's a really interesting method as well, also highly effective. Not a lot of guys around here are shooting that with our modern traditional equipment, but there are guys that still do shoot it. In terms of other equipment, a lot of guys like to wear an arm guard or a bracer just to help protect from string slap. With that string slamming home, I've hit myself in the forearm more than once. It stings pretty good if you don't have something on there. And then a lot of guys too are going to have some kind of quiver. You have a lot of bow mounted quivers. Some guys like a hip quiver or a back quiver, but some place to put your arrows too.
And is it, you need that forearm guard a lot of times because the geometry of the bows is different than a compound essentially, right? So by the time you release, your hand might be what's the average length from like a riser to string when it's not drawn back, like maybe like 12 inches or something like that?
Yeah, so it depends on the length of the bow. But the shorter the bow, the shorter the brace height typically. My bow, I want to say, is about 7.5, 8 inch brace height. And so if you're not getting your arm out of the way, you can definitely make contact with skin.
Yeah, those
Yes.
hurt. I remember back in the 90s when started in archery shooting a bear whitetail 2, which was shaped more like a longbow. It had little small wheel cams on it, but man, I would just thump my arm with that thing, and I quickly learned.
Yeah.
I think I still have a couple of those guards, so I'm halfway there
Hmm.
with the gear, with the gear. So Kip, with
Yeah.
if I'm thinking about ditching my compound gear and going traditional, could you speak to maybe some of the challenges I'd face, and then maybe some of the reward?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, like you said, the first thing, number one, is just practice. You have to put in a lot of time with a traditional bow to become proficient at it. My coworker and I, we shoot just about every day at lunch. We go out and fling some arrows at some targets, and that's what it requires. There's just a lot that goes into your form, your release, building up strength. You know, a 70-pound longbow. When you're at full draw, you're holding all 70 pounds back. You know, there's no let off any kind. Have to make sure you're not overbowed. You want to make sure you got the right draw, um, because if you don't, it'll mess up your form. It'll mess up your practice. Um, Another thing that you got to get used to is getting close. Most traditional guys I know that are hunting deer are shooting for under 20-yard shots. A lot of guys are wanting 10 yards and in. And that's a challenge, but it's also very rewarding. Uh, there's just something about getting in close on deer, having them right under your stand, seeing them interact. That's actually one thing I love more than anything about being out in the woods. Even if I don't take a shot, just being that close to the wildlife and having them unaware that I'm there, it's a pretty cool experience. In terms of other rewards, like I said earlier, there's something about just a simple bow, drawing it back and letting an arrow go and watching it hit right where you're looking, and not really having no sights, no anything like that, but just knowing that the muscle memory that you had allowed you to make that shot. Every time I do that and hit right where I'm looking, it's a good feeling.
So how do you aim without a sight? Like what kind of sight picture are you looking for there?
Yeah, so there's different ways traditional guys like to shoot. A lot of guys that are really accurate will actually use the arrow itself as a method of aiming. They'll sight down the shaft. They'll use the tip of the arrow to kind of point on target or figure out their height and get everything in alignment. The way I shoot is just called instinctive, and basically the best way I could categorize it is just it's muscle memory. You shoot enough times, it's like shooting a free throw. After a while, you know what you have to do to make that shot. And sometimes it's off, and you don't know why it's off, and it takes you a while to get back on. But with enough time put in, enough practice, it's really funny. But you don't really even think about aiming. You just think about taking the shot and letting your body remember what to do.
I guess to add on to that, how important is it to use a rangefinder with a traditional bow? Because obviously with a compound, everyone's, if your sight has 3 pins, you know this is 20, 30, 40. So if I range, I know that tree is at 20 yards. So if he comes by there, I'm going to use this pin. Are you learning to gauge more with your eyes
Mm-hmm.
than you are with a rangefinder? Because I guess there's not really that much of a correlation anyways, in terms of maybe you memorize how high you hold or something, but what is the norm in terms
Mm-hmm.
of rangefinder usage?
We don't find a lot of guys doing rangefinders. It is just the sight picture, guessing the distance. One thing, I mean, keeping it under 20 yards does help with that. You know, if we're not taking 60-yard shots, we don't have to figure out if it's 40, 50, 60. If it's 20 and under, for the most part, you're going to be able to hold it pretty consistently around the same area, a little higher, a little lower. But shrinking that effective range helps for sure. There are people out there that can drive tacks with traditional equipment at long ranges. It's incredible to me that they're able to do that, and they're kind of a different breed than your average archer. They're a Hawkeye or whoever type of archer. There are guys out there that can hit, water drops out of the air, aspirin out of the air with traditional equipment. It blows my mind to watch that, just knowing the work that goes into just hitting a target on a consistent basis.
Kip, you amaze me, and I thank God for the passion you have for this. I'm sure you're able to do things that normal people can't do. What was the heaviest traditional archery bow you've ever pulled back? Do you know the weight?
Yeah, so back when I first got started and I was a little bit younger making self bows, I decided I wanted to make an English war bow, and I made one that drew about 115 pounds at 32 inches.
So there you have it, guys. 115 pounds. Yeah, the opportunity's there. So, well, Kip, we appreciate you joining us tonight on Hey Bub Outdoors. And for all of you who are interested in taking this dive and exploring the traditional archery plunge, we encourage you. Kip, will you share the website and maybe some of the places they can find community focused around blacktail archery?
Yeah, the website is just blacktailbows.com. You can check us out over on Instagram and Facebook. Search for Blacktail Bows. You should be able to find us there. There are some fan pages on Facebook with guys that have our stuff that have kind of their own little community. They like to share the bows they have, or if they have a used bow for sale, they'll put it up there. But yeah, other than that, check us out on there. Shoot me a message on Instagram. I'll try and respond as quick as I can. And look forward to having more guys join the club.
Yeah, it's awesome. So we're going to continue this theme of should I ditch my compound bow for traditional archery here over these next couple of weeks. We have a guy that's years behind Kip in bow making, but he's been making his own bows now for the last bit, and he's been harvesting animals. I know that's been really satisfying for him. We're going to interview him next week, and then here in a couple of weeks, we're going to have a first-time traditional archer, a longtime friend of mine who harvested his first deer just last week with traditional archery equipment. He's been a long time compound person, was in the hunting industry for quite a while, and he's gone to this simple way, and I think he's having a blast. So we're going to try to convince our audience, and maybe even both of us, that we need to ditch our compounds for traditional gear. So, hey, thanks for being here, Kip. Really appreciate it, brother.
Yep. Thank you guys for having me. It was a good time.
Yeah. Thanks for watching Hey Bub Outdoors. We'll catch you next time.